If one takes evolutionary psychology seriously, then it must be applied equally across the board. Much has been made about Jewish group evolutionary strategy, but little has been written about the famous Goy, or Goyim for the plural, group evolutionary strategy, GES for short. How else can one explain the broad swath of online personalities who obsess over Jews, ranging from Christian, Muslim, atheist, neo-pagan, to white, black, and every shade in between, sometimes even combining forces and looking past their differences to unite? Truly, the Jews are peacemakers. What I endeavor to do here is not to debunk any of the statements of these Jew fetishists, but understand the commonalities between such a diverse rainbow coalition of people dedicated to talking about Jews nonstop on the internet. Classic scapegoat theory and deflection from one's own group seems to play a role. If Jews can be blamed for bad behavior that other groups also engage in, with the added element of being an already hated and easily identifiable minority, it makes sense to point the finger at them. Tradcats will point to Jews for pro-open borders policies and refugee aid, citing groups such as Hayes or George Soros, whilst having far greater numbers of organizations dedicated to immigration and refugee assistance, plus numerous popes making unapologetically pro-migrant statements from Rome. Those who acknowledge this will just LARP as sedevacantists or say the Catholic charities are actually Jewish. Something I can kind of agree with, but for different reasons. Muslims and their defenders, rather than looking at funding from Arab Gulf states and fundamentalist Islam and its interpretation/history, will just blame the Israeli-Palestinian conflict for all of the Islamist terror attacks, or just directly say they are Mossad false flags, or blaming it on the odd Jewish convert. Nationalists of states that have their own record of ethnic cleansing and occupation will point to Israel to ward off attention to themselves. Sudanese weirdos like Myron Gaines will point to Israel to distract from his family's personal role in the Sudanese conflict. All of the classics like Jews are the communists and the capitalists at the same time, depending on your political viewpoint. Similarly, Jews are the real racists and leading the anti-racist charge at the same time, again depending on what viewpoint you want to take. I've even seen LGBT go after Judaism as the root cause of homophobia, as well as the obvious Jew bashing for Reform Judaism's overall pro-LGBT stance and activism. Christianity as Jewish versus paganism being Jewish, black culture the fault of Jewish record label owners, etc. I can probably think of more and don't want to inundate with too many pictures of slop content from X. I think you get the point. The Jew is a useful tool to either distract or soil any kind of thing you want to denigrate. A placeholder for otherwise rational argumentation. XYZ is Jewish, don't you know? Money and clout also play an important role. If one wants to make a living online or get a following, talking about Jews is probably the easiest way to do so in the current internet climate. And why wouldn't someone do this? The internet is not exactly known for morality, honesty, scruples, or truth-telling. Also, Jews are an extremely tiny minority, so while you might get some Jews complaining, at most try to cancel you, but at this point, what does that even mean, especially if the person is making money off the internet anyways? You will basically be appealing to people from most other groups on the planet. Muslims, third worldists, communists, Nazis, most Christian denominations, pagans, etc. all have a bone to pick with either Jews or Israel, or both in some sense or another, even if those reasons contradict with the other groups. Negativity drives engagement and views and clicks far more than positivity, as well as JQing is still seen as somewhat edgy and bold, even if it's the most basic bitch thing on the internet these days. With the discourse of cancel culture still on people's minds. In talking about Jews and Israel, one can basically commodify the activism of talking about Jays all day on the internet, sell merch, have a community where people just spurg out in schizophrenic fashion, oftentimes infighting, and generally have some kind of social life that they can't find IRL. Laziness and confirmation bias also play a role. A single answer to complex issues is a lot more palatable than some tome-length explanation that requires actual reading and the use of basic logic. From immigration to the war in Iraq, even the recent spat with Venezuela, has been dumbed down to the Jews. Maduro doesn't like Israel, obviously Zog. Lastly, I would add that any kind of disunity/division could be exploited by foreign actors. I don't merely want to blame everything on Russian bots or Qatari agents, but if they were in part responsible for things like BLM, or at least exploited the movement, then I would not be surprised if they somewhat had a role in talk of the Jews in Israel on the internet. Here is one example in France, targeting both Jews and Muslims to inflame tensions in that country by Russia. Also, we know that certain media personalities are in part, and knowingly or unknowingly, funded by these foreign actors. I mentioned Russia and Qatar because they are the most cited and the two most recent countries with odd relations with Tucker Carlson, for example. I'm aware Israel also probably does some kinds of influence campaigns as well. Clearly those are failing. Those 7,000 shekels are rookie numbers. To recap, there are essentially numerous reasons to attack the Jews and almost none not to do so. People love their pet projects as well. Just look how long MAGA has been in love with Trump. People are just starting to peel off from that coal after almost a decade. The Jew fetish is also sort of a pet project. It provides answers, well, an answer, and the official one at that, an online community, money, and a scapegoat for all of the problems of the Gentile, and some opportunistic Jews as well, to be honest. I suppose the question is not why do people do this JQing/J fetishization, but rather why not?